Last week, the trial of a social media influencer ended with a conviction for murder after she and her mother were found guilty of killing two men who died when their car was rammed off the road.
Mahek Bukhari, a fashion influencer, wanted to silence her mother's lover, Saqib Hussain, when he threatened to expose their affair.
It's just extraordinary, isn't it? It's just every element of that is just horrible. We're now joined by Ansar Hussain, who is the uncle of Mohammed Hashim, who lost his life after innocently agreeing to drive the intended victim, Saqib Hussain. How awful, because what do you know that did your nephew know why his friend needed a lift, and do you know anything about what led to him getting into that car that fatal day and driving his friend?
Yes, firstly, good morning to you guys and everybody who's listening outside there on TV right now. We didn't know a lot when the news came to us, a tragic news. But I suppose once we sat through two trials, because one of them got abandoned right at the end, we got to know a lot about that night, what happened that night.
What did you discover about why your nephew had listened to this plea for help and drive me somewhere? Did he know what he was getting himself into?
So Mohammed Hashim, his personality was very different in our times. So he was somebody who literally lived 60 or 70 years of his life within that 21 years.
He was like an old soul?
No, he was just a very active soul. So in one day, he'd go around, meet so many people, from young people, from the elderly. So one of his motto or his philosophies of life, which he'd put on his social media all the time, was if I can make them laugh or smile, job done for the day.
So he wanted to be helpful? Yes,
and that was, he was compassionate about healing people. And I've used the word healing because it's something I've thought about a lot since yesterday. What's the word? Because his type of healing was smiling at people, making people laugh, going to see them if they've got a difficulty. And
yes,
I remember...
And his friend was in distress. Is that what we know? The person who was the actual intended target was in distress when he asked?
Yes, this is something one of my sons told me a few days ago. They said that when they spoke to him and said to him, how come you suddenly become very close to this friend lately, last few months? And what he said was, he's sad, and he's going through some difficulty, and he wants to be there for him because he knows how that feels.
So he just wanted to look after his friend. He just wanted to help his friend feel a little bit better and support him in some way.
Yeah.
How do you and your nephew's family manage to process what has happened to him and the loss that you've all been through? Because the circumstances surrounding the whole case are just so extraordinary and so tragic.
I suppose what keeps us busy, especially the ones who have been so hurt far more than even myself, like his mother and other people, is after nearly 18 months now, we're still discovering Hashim. So even now we've got people coming up to us and saying, you know what, I knew Hashim, this is what happened to Hashim, in my experience with him. We had an elderly person who said that he saw him a few months in a chip shop, and he said, Uncle, I'm going to pay for your chips.
Oh.
Does that make sense? And he goes, I'm not going to let you pay for these chips, I'm going to pay for them. And there's so many stories about Hashim. Just to share one of them, is one of his family members, he had actually left home due to some personal reasons, and his mum was quite upset that he'd left. So he was a family member, but he'd never really been around their house. So one day he turns up at their house and he knocks on the door, and the lady says, she goes, I never really recognized him because I hadn't seen him a lot. And he turned around to her and he said, oh, do you know who I am? He mentioned his father's name, and he said, I'm his son, and I've come to spend time with you because your son's gone, so I'm going to be here for you as your son until he comes back.
Oh, my goodness.
And he hasn't spent no time with this elderly lady before, and he spent months, going to their house, right, and just sitting with her and saying to her, I'm here with you.
It's so, how old was he?
21 when he passed away.
Goodness.
It speaks volumes to his character, doesn't it?
It does. I don't, you know, is there a bit of you that wishes he just hadn't been so kind because it's literally his kindness.
Yes.
His kindness led him to sit in that car that day. As a parent, you just think, oh, you know.
I mean, one of the stories is like that evening, Hashim never used to like enjoy driving himself. Right, so whenever he'd go out, he'd always say to whoever was with him, "You're driving," right? And even that night, what he was doing with the group of friends that were out in Banbury, like just hanging about, he was telling them, "Look, can you give Saqib a lift today? Because you know he really needs a lift." And he literally, his friends have said this, and they actually mentioned it in court as well. So he spent a long time trying to convince them to give him a lift. And when he realised that you know he hasn't got a lift, that's when he went home and he borrowed his father's car, and then he drove him. But one of his friends actually mentioned, he said like that he heard him say that, "I ain't gonna give you a lift. You know I don't like driving." And stuff like this, right? When you say he doesn't like driving, it wasn't that he didn't drive a lot. He did drive a lot, but if he had a choice not to drive, he chose not to. Yeah.
And it was his conscience and his need to look after his friend that drove him to sort of make that decision. What is it that you and the family hope comes from this that can be, in some way, any way, positive?
Let me tell you two more stories about Hashim, because you think through stories people learn and they get to know people's personalities as well. So Hashim set up a football team, right? And these are guys who are his age, or like a couple of years difference, in the cages, like in the local park.
Sure.
And he's got 11 people together to play for him, and he's called the football team Hashim United. Like.
Well, let's hope his legacy lives on, because he was obviously an amazing community young man, and that is a credit to you and all your family who raised him. So our hearts go out to you and your family, and what an absolute tragedy. But it is lovely to hear some fantastic stories about this remarkable young man who just found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time and paid the highest price. Thank you so much for joining us on Good Morning Britain, Answer. Thank you so much.